1913. One family decided to capture a simple portrait, a moment of love and pride that would be passed down for generations. At first glance, the photograph shows nothing unusual. Proud parents, smiling children, and their loyal dog sitting faithfully at their feet. But when the picture was studied more closely, attention shifted from the faces of the family to the eyes of the dog, eyes that seemed to hold something far from human. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to Mystery Diary and hit the notification bell. We're about to uncover one of the strangest photographic mysteries ever recorded. And tell us in the comments, do you believe animals can sense what humans cannot? It was the year 1913, a time when families believed that a single photograph could hold their legacy forever. The Turner family was no different. They lived in a quiet town, not wealthy, not poor, just ordinary people who wanted to leave behind proof of their life together. For them, the idea of a portrait was not about beauty but about memory. A photograph was something that could outlive them, something their grandchildren might one day hold in their hands. On a cool afternoon, they dressed in their best clothes and walked to the local photographer's studio. The father stood tall and serious, wearing a dark suit that smelled faintly of mothballs. The mother, nervous but proud, straightened her blouse again and again, making sure every crease was hidden. Their two children were restless, whispering to each other and giggling until their father cleared his throat and reminded them to behave. At their feet sat the family dog. He was no ordinary pet to them, but almost another child in the household. Loyal, calm, and strangely intelligent, he seemed to sense emotions better than most people. The photographer placed him right in front, almost like the guardian of the family. The dog sat perfectly still, his head slightly raised, as if he understood the importance of what was about to happen. The camera was prepared. In those days, photography was not simple. The large wooden box, the glass plates, the heavy tripod, everything demanded patience. The flash powder was lit, and in that brief burst of smoke and light, time seemed to freeze. The Turners stood together, holding their breath, unaware that this moment would one day be remembered for reasons none of them could have imagined. When it was over, they relaxed, laughing softly at how serious they had looked. It seemed like just another ordinary photo, a picture of love and family unity. But hidden in the film, waiting to be revealed, was something that would change the meaning of that photograph forever. Days later, the photograph was ready. The Turner family gathered around the print, eager to see how they looked. At first glance, it was exactly what they had hoped for. A proud father, a graceful mother, children frozen in time with their stiff little smiles, and their loyal dogs seated at the front. Everything seemed perfect. But as they passed the picture from hand to hand, one of the children frowned. He leaned closer, squinting at the dog. "Mama," he whispered. "His eyes, they don't look right." The mother brushed it off at first. Photographs often made people look strange, and perhaps the flash had caught the dog at the wrong angle. Yet when she studied it, her expression changed. The dog's eyes didn't look like the soft, warm gaze they knew so well. Instead, they seemed unnaturally sharp, almost human in their intensity. The longer you stared, the more it felt like the eyes were staring back. Not with loyalty, but with awareness. Cold, calculating awareness. The father tried to dismiss it. "It's only a trick of the light," he said firmly, though his voice carried a hint of unease. But neighbors who later saw the photograph were unsettled too. They claimed the dog's eyes looked larger than they should, reflecting something that wasn't in the room. Some even whispered that it didn't look like the same dog at all. That night, as the family sat quietly by the fire, the photograph resting on the mantel, the dog lifted his head. He stared into the dark corner of the room and began to growl. His eyes, catching the faint glow of the firelight, seemed to glimmer with the same unsettling sharpness as in the picture. For the first time, the Turners began to wonder if their photograph had captured more than just their family. Perhaps it had revealed something else, something they were not meant to see. In the weeks that followed, the photograph became a source of unease inside the Turner household. At first, they kept it proudly on display, but soon it drew the wrong kind of attention. Visitors who came by for tea would glance at the picture, admire the family, and then fall silent when their eyes reached the dog. Some shifted uncomfortably, others asked questions they couldn't answer. Why does he look so aware? The children began avoiding the room where the portrait hung. At night, they whispered to each other about the way the dog now seemed different. He was still loyal, still protective, but he no longer wagged his tail as often. Sometimes they found him sitting perfectly still, staring into the photograph as if trying to recognize the creature that stared back at him. Neighbors started talking too. Rumors spread quickly in small towns, and before long the Turner home was known as the place with the strange photo. One farmer swore the dog barked at him when he passed by, though no one else had heard a sound. Another woman claimed the animal's eyes glowed unnaturally in the moonlight, though she admitted she had only seen it from a distance. Inside the family, tensions grew. The father grew angry whenever the subject was raised, insisting it was nonsense. Yet even he began locking the doors earlier at night, as if afraid of something unseen. The mother prayed more often, clutching her rosary tightly, and the children clung closer to each other whenever the dog began growling at shadows no one else could see. What had once been an ordinary household now carried the weight of a silent fear. Every creak in the floor, every flicker of the lamp seemed magnified by the presence of that photograph, and the dog whose eyes no longer belonged entirely to him. The whispers around the Turner family's strange photograph soon turned into full stories. In the countryside of 1913, people carried with them old beliefs, the kind passed down for centuries. And among those beliefs was one that made the photograph even more terrifying: the idea that animals, especially dogs, could see what humans could not. Old villagers recalled tales from Europe, stories their parents had told them. In Russian folklore, dogs were said to guard the threshold between the living and the dead. If their eyes ever looked too human, it meant they had glimpsed something from the other side. In German tales, animals that reflected human-like gazes were considered vessels for wandering spirits. And in rural England, a dog staring into shadows was thought to be watching the movements of a ghost. The Turners tried to dismiss such stories, but events inside their home became harder to ignore. At night, the dog would suddenly stand, fur bristling, and growl at corners where nothing moved. Sometimes his eyes seemed to shimmer unnaturally, not just catching light but almost glowing with a dull awareness. The children swore they saw figures flicker in the glass of the window when the dog's gaze fixed on it. One evening, the mother entered the sitting room and froze. The dog was sitting in front of the photograph, staring into its own image. His body was trembling, yet he wouldn't move away. When she called his name, his head turned slowly toward her, and for a moment, just a moment, she felt certain that the eyes looking at her were not her dog's at all. Word spread quickly. Neighbors avoided visiting after dark. A local pastor warned the family that they might be harboring something unnatural. "It is not the dog," he said quietly. "It is what looks through him." But the children clung to the animal, refusing to believe their loyal friend could be anything else. And so the tension deepened, between folklore and faith, between fear and denial, between the ordinary life they wanted to keep, and the extraordinary terror that seemed to grow stronger with every passing day. The Turners' unease turned into quiet dread when illness struck their youngest child. At first, it was nothing unusual, a fever, pale skin, the kind of sickness families in those years often faced. But as the days stretched on, the child grew weaker, and no medicine seemed to help. Through it all, the dog never left the child's side. He slept by the bed, whined softly when the fever rose, and growled at unseen things in the corners of the room. Sometimes the family would catch him staring directly into the child's face, eyes wide and glimmering in the candlelight, as if he were waiting for something only he could sense. On the night the child's breathing grew shallow, the house felt different. The lamps flickered though no wind touched them. The family huddled together in the sick room while the dog began to howl, a long, mournful sound that sent chills through the walls. Neighbors later swore they heard it echo across the fields, though none dared come closer. And then, just as the clock struck midnight, the child's chest fell still. The house went silent. The dog gave one final cry and collapsed at the foot of the bed, eyes staring open, reflecting a strange light though the room was dark. For a moment, The mother swore she saw another figure flicker in those eyes. Not her child, not anyone she knew, but something else watching back. The family buried the child the next day, grief heavy on their shoulders. The photograph was locked away, hidden in a drawer no one touched again. But the memory of the dog's unnatural eyes, and the night his howls carried death into their home, would never leave them. Years passed, but the story of the Turner family photograph never faded. The print itself was locked away, hidden deep in an old chest, but the memory lived on through quiet conversations and late-night whispers. Neighbors told their children not to stare too long into a dog's eyes, and some even avoided walking past the Turner home after dark. For the family, life went on, yet nothing was ever truly the same. The surviving children grew older, but whenever they thought back to their lost sibling, the sound they remembered most was not the silence of the night. It was the dog's final howl, echoing like a warning. What exactly had been captured in that photograph? Was it simply a trick of early photography, a flaw of light and shadow? Or had the camera exposed something that the human eye was never meant to see? Folklore said animals could sense spirits, but in this case, it felt as if something had looked back through them. The photograph remains a mystery, a simple family portrait from 1913 that should have been nothing more than a memory of love now carries a legend of fear. And today, whenever people retell the story, one haunting question always returns. If you looked closely into your own pet's eyes tonight, would you be certain you were the only one staring back?